This is Mount Marvelous. These are the rambly babblings of a middle-aged man. Because this is Bunzy's Vlog! Hurrah! Hello, and welcome once more to Bunzy's Vlog. Now, I haven't done a vlog in ages, but I thought I would do one. Because there's a date coming up, isn't there? A date etched in infamy. A date that'll change the world. A date unlike any other for people of Britain. Yes, June the 23rd, basically, isn't it? June the 23rd is when the people of Britain go to the polls and they answer the referendum question. Now, for anyone who doesn't even know what a referendum is, you have a vote, and a referendum just means it's a question with a yes or no answer. So, for instance, has Boris Johnson got the weirdest hair on the planet? Yes. So the question we're going to have is, should Britain remain in the EU or should we leave? Now, there's a huge amount of scaremongering going on television, isn't there, at the moment? From, politicians and from newscasters and, from everyone, really. The government is saying that if we leave the EU, there will be famine and there will be pestilence and people's mortgages will rise, the interest rates will rise, house prices will go down, we'll be taken over by illegal immigrants who will eat our children and ride off on our cats. But what is actually true? Is any of this true? Is it all just, propaganda made up by the government because they're scared? I've done a bit of research into it. Personally, I didn't really understand it myself. I didn't know whether to vote to stay in the EU or to leave the EU. Depending on who you believe, you have to decide where you're going to be better off. So I thought I'd do a bit of research, and I literally spent days, weeks, months, years doing this research. Alright, I'm lying. I literally spent about 5-10 minutes online having a look through a few different news stories to find out the bare details so I could explain them to you. Perhaps I can be of some use in my own strange, idiotic, middle-aged man type way. So, let's begin with the pros and cons of staying or leaving the EU, what is now known as Brexit. And no, that's not a new type of breakfast cereal, that's a euphemism for Britain's exit of the EU. Let's start with how much it actually costs Britain to remain a member of the EU. Well, last year, Britain actually spent £13 billion Britain sent over to Europe in a little rowing boat, rowed across by George Osborne. We sent 13 billion. And what do we get back in return? We got 4.5 billion that the EU spent on us. Now, let's put that into some sort of strange, pointless perspective that even I can understand. Get the 13 here, take 4.5 billion away, you end up with about 8.5 billion pounds, which sounds like a huge, vast amount of money. And it is, unless you take into consideration it's probably what Simon Cowell spends on tooth whitening products in the average 6-month period. But, obviously I'm a normal human man. I work in a secondary school as a teaching assistant. I don't earn 8.5 billion pounds. At the end of the day, compared to Britain's overall, GDP, domestic products and profits and blah blah blah, Britain has far more money than that. So it's a vast amount of money, but it's not even like 7% of the National Health Service yearly budget. So, it's not as much money as you might think it is. Still, 8.5 billion is what we lost by being a member of Europe last year. So what about trade? Surely being a member of Europe helps. I don't hear you say. Yes, it does. Being a member of Europe is good for British trade. In fact, 50% of our exports in Britain go off to EU countries to trade, which is great. We do have a lot of say in the way Europe works and the way Europe trades, but on the other side, there's a lot of downsides. For instance, Europe makes up a lot of very stupid rules about how we can trade. One, it tells us how many fish we can fish for. Fishermen have to go fishing Well, they don't have to go fishing, obviously they do it for a job. They fish out a load of fish, and if they fished out too many fish, they have to put those fish back in the sea. And sadly, a load of those fish might be dead, but because of EU quotas, they get chucked back in the sea. As long as they don't land them back on land and sell them, everything's hunky-dory. And there's other stupid EU rules. For instance, how much meat goes into a British sausage? Why should Europe have a say in how much meat goes into a British sausage? The answer is they should have no say. We should be able to put 100% British pork into our sausages, or no British pork whatsoever into our vegetarian sausages, or whatever into sausages that are made of plastic for small children to play with on cookery sets. We should be able to have 100% plastic sausages. It doesn't matter whether the sausages are beef, whether they're vegetable, whether they're plastic for children. It doesn't matter. The point is, should the EU be able to tell us whether we put meat or plastic into our sausages? I don't know. I'll let you decide that one. But 50% of our exports do go to the EU, and obviously there's a downside. There are other upsides to being a member of the EU that are to do with trade. For instance, at the moment the EU is sort of in negotiations with the United States of America to create the world's biggest free trade area. So obviously if we're a member of the EU, if that happens, we're going to be able to sell a lot more stuff to America, a lot more cheaply, and make more money. However, conversely, that might not happen. And if it doesn't happen, we can still sell stuff to America, because we sell stuff to America now. And, America is not going to suddenly go, I'm sorry, I'm not buying anything from you. You're not a member of Europe. Britain, I've never heard of you. They're going to go, oh, quite like Scottish whiskey. Obviously more of an American accent. Yeah. I quite like Scottish whiskey. They're still going to want to buy red salmon. They're still going to want to buy, I'm trying to think of British products. Kendal mint cake. Yeah, I'm not good on Cornish pasties. Yeah, the Cornish pasty export business, huge. I'm sure whether we're in the American free trade area or not, we're still going to be chucking out a lot of Cornish pasties across the Atlantic. Never in the field of human cuisine have so many Americans enjoyed the Cornish pasty. However, a lot of people say that if we leave Europe, then there's going to be a lot of trade embargoes put on us, handcuffing us, and we're going to go into free-fall meltdown and we're going to be poor for centuries. And Barclays don't actually totally agree with that. They say that there's actually a possibility that if we leave Europe, it will start a domino effect, which means the EU will actually crumble. Because if we leave Europe, there's certain countries that will probably have to leave Europe as well. For instance, Cyprus is being shored up by us, by Germany and by everyone else in Europe, but by the richer countries, and so is Spain at the moment. So if our money is no longer there to shore them up, they're going to probably have to drop out of Europe. That'll have a domino effect, which means Spain might have to drop out of Europe. So countries will be dropping out of the EU quicker than you can eat a bratwurst. So yeah, is that bad? Is that good? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there to you. Now let's get on to the hot potatoes. And boy, are these potatoes hot. Why are they so hot? Because they're immigration potatoes. And you don't want to mess with them immigration potatoes, because they're some hot potatoes. What am I talking about? Immigration. Yes, it's a word no one likes mentioning, do they? Ooh, don't mention the word immigration, because if you mention the word immigration, you're a racist. Oh yes. So, I'm going to mention the word immigration, and I'd like to go down the calmer immigration route. Okay, how many Eastern European people are there working in the UK at the moment? Go on. Oh, have a guess. I'll give you 5 seconds. Boop, 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 boop. Have you guessed yet? Okay, I'll tell you. The Office for National Statistics say there's about 942,000 Eastern Europeans working in Britain at the moment. That sounds like a huge amount of Eastern Europeans. And obviously there's a lot of other nationalities working here as well. And anyone who wants us to leave Europe, or who doesn't like immigrants, is going to say, oh, that's too many, they're taking away jobs from us Brits, surely. Obviously in that voice. But are they really? Because by being a member of the EU, we're also allowed to send Britons all over Europe to work. We have a free working arrangement where we can go and work in different countries in Europe and Europeans can come and work here. So I don't know if it is a bad thing really, because a lot of the Eastern Europeans and the rest of Europe who come over, and it's not just Eastern Europe, I picked that figure because that was the biggest one that's mentioned by the National Statistics Office. Aside from them, there's also 791,000 Western Europeans who've come over to the UK to work, plus there's 2.93 million workers from outside the EU who are also here working, such as people from China and people from India and people from America and Canada and blah blah blah, Australia and every other country that's not a member of the EU. But as I say, however many there are, we are also allowed to go and work in other places in Europe because of the EU deal. Also, a lot of those people that are here working are actually helping us. There's a huge amount of immigrants that work in the National Health Service doing jobs that actually there's not enough British people here to do. Great thing. Same with a lot of very poorly paid jobs. If you look at the amount of poorly paid jobs in Britain, immigrants actually do a huge amount of those jobs. Now, some people would argue, but what about people who don't have many qualifications? They can't get that sort of work. There is that argument, but there's also the argument that people with not many qualifications wouldn't get any sort of work. So, there's a lot of people who wouldn't want to do the work that a lot of immigrants are doing. So, whichever way you look at it, you can look at it the opposite way. I suppose the other argument against immigrants coming to Britain is the old benefits one. Oh yes, they're stealing our benefits. Oh, our benefits are lovely. Lovely many benefits. They're taking all the council houses. Are they taking all the council houses though? I don't know. Why are there no council houses anymore? It really is done on a sort of, you have this many kids or you have that many kids. There's a lot of reasons people get council houses. There's a lot of reasons people get benefits. A lot of reasons people get help from the NHS. I don't know if we'll be any worse or any better off if we leave the EU. Okay, so if we did leave the EU, yes, there'd be less immigration, but also there'd be less people from Britain going to other countries to work. And what you've got to remember is a lot of those people that are coming here to work are actually creating money for Britain. They're living here, so they're spending money as well as earning money. They might be starting businesses that obviously bring money into the country. So you've got to look at it in every direction, really. Well, as for benefits, whether we're in the EU or not in the EU, benefits are always going to be a controversial issue. Now, my personal view, because I haven't really given my personal view yet, is that people should be allowed to live wherever the hell they want to live. But, as for benefits and things, maybe have some rule where you have to live in a country for a certain amount of time before you get benefits, or you have to at least work in that country for a certain amount of time before you get benefits. But of course, then people are going to go down there in the comments and they're going to say, yeah, but what about children coming to this country? If their parents are not getting benefits, then obviously they're going to be starving if they're not working. And, again, I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm an idiot. I'm not a politician. I'm just looking at this in order to try and understand it myself, really. This is like the dummy's guide to the EU referendum debate. So, what about us in Britain being richer or poorer? Now, if you believe Chancellor George Osborne, and a lot of people do, he says that by 2030 the average British home, if we leave the EU, would be £4,300 worse off. He says by 2030. That's 14 years' time. Now, let's be honest. Nobody on Earth has ever managed to predict what happens in 14 years' time. It's ridiculous. No one can do it. I couldn't tell you what coloured pants I was going to be wearing in 14 years' time. And don't say brown. Alright. It's impossible to predict that far ahead because there could be a war in between now and then. A meteorite could hit Earth and that's going to affect house prices. It's going to affect jobs. It's going to affect everything. Madonna could prove to be a transformer and she could destroy half the planet. Again, we don't know, do we? We don't know what's going to happen. So George Osborne can make whatever prediction he wants, but I would take it with a pinch of salt if he's predicting something 14 years ahead. Because to be honest, he's just hedging his bets and he has absolutely no idea. And that's what the No campaigners are saying. They're saying it's absurd that he's saying it's £4,300 worse off, because he cannot possibly know that far ahead. What else has old Georgie Osborne said? Well, him and David Cameron have also said that if we leave the EU, house prices will drop dramatically. You could believe it, I suppose, but at the end of the day, the reason house prices are the price that they are is because of supply and demand. If we leave the EU, people are still going to want to buy houses. For instance, let's use London as an example. There's not enough houses, so the house price keeps going up. You have too many houses that are empty, the price goes down until people start buying them, the price goes up, other people stop buying them, price goes down. People buy them, price goes up. People stop buying them, price goes down. People buy them and the price goes up, and people stop buying them, the price goes down. Down, up, down, up. People buy them, it goes on up and then it goes down. I think you get the idea. It doesn't matter whether we're in the EU or not. Yeah, okay, so house prices could change if we cannot get the materials as easy as we can now. But we're still going to have the same amount of land. We're still going to have the same amount of people looking for houses. So, let's get on to security and what effect leaving the EU is going to have on that. Well, if you believe Ian Duncan Smith, and he's the Work and Pension Secretary, he says that if we remain in the EU, it's going to leave the door open to international terrorism and they're going to flood in. One question, why? Yeah, why by, staying in the EU, is it going to open the door to terrorists? It's not. We're not going to have something on our passports that says, Britain, please come in, terrorists. We'd love you to come and bomb us. No, we're not. We're still going to have the same security on our borders as we have now. We're still going to have the same police. Nothing's going to get better or worse when it comes to the amount of security on our borders. So that is utter drivel. It's not going to have that much of an effect on terrorists. They're not going to go, oh, they're in the EU, let's go there. Oh, they've left the EU, we won't be able to go to Britain anymore. Okay, we'll go across the Atlantic. They're not going to think like that. They simply want to cause as much destruction as possible. Now, Defence Secretary Michael Fallon says that it's by being a member of the EU we can exchange criminal records with other countries in Europe, look at passenger records and things like that. I'm sorry, Mr. Fallon, but that's rubbish. Because say there's a chance of a bombing somewhere in Europe. Britain phones up Europe. Europe is not going to go, I'm sorry Britain, no, we're not going to exchange information with you. You're not a member of us anymore. They're not going to do it. Because the whole security thing works both ways. We share information with Europe, they share information with us. That, again, is scaremongering. It's not going to happen. We're not going to get the phone put down on us. So, utter drivel. I think the biggest things for whether we leave or stay in Europe come down to money. It comes down to money, and it comes down to whether we want to follow EU rules. So, I can hear you ask that final question. What are you going to do, Bunzy? Are you going to vote to stay in, or are you going to vote to leave the EU? Well, let me tell you once and for all. I've weighed up the pros and cons, the rights and the left, the Camerons against the Johnsons, and on June the 23rd, I think I'm going to vote to